All right, get ready to dive deep because today we're tackling something I know a lot of you are thinking about, building trust, and specifically how to make it happen on software teams. Got the perfect guide for us right here, this article. Building the Foundation, Practical Steps to Foster Trust in Your Software Engineering Team. And just a heads up, it really gets you thinking. I mean, it's a no-brainer, everyone wants that well-oiled team, but where do you even begin? What actually gets you there?
You know, the thing that grabbed me right away is how the article goes straight for the heart of it, trust.
Yeah.
It's like the bedrock, the absolute foundation for any team that wants to perform well, but especially in software, you know?
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Can't imagine trying to code, collaborate if you don't trust the person on the other end.
Exactly. Imagine it, no trust. People clam up if they spot a problem, they won't take chances with their code, and forget sharing ideas. All that hesitation. It just kills momentum, even impacts the end product.
It's like there's that saying, move fast and break things,
Yeah.
but without trust, you're moving slow, breaking less. Not exactly a recipe for innovation.
You got it. And that's why this article is gold. It doesn't stop at trust is good. It gives you actionable steps to actually build it.
And it all starts with step one, which I loved, figuring out the trust temperature of your team. Right now, love that phrase, trust temperature.
Sure.
It's spot on. You got to know where you're at before you can even think about improving.
Right, like you wouldn't prescribe medicine without checking the patient's vitals, right? This step is all about those honest, open conversations about how the team's actually doing. And yeah, that might mean facing some tough realities.
Because if you sweep those issues under the rug, it's just going to blow up later.
100%. And that takes us to step two, which might surprise some folks being okay with healthy conflict. We often see conflict as bad news, something to avoid at all costs.
So true. Our gut reaction is to shy away from disagreements, especially at work.
Exactly. But the article makes a really important distinction here. It's not about dodging conflict completely, it's about reframing it as constructive disagreement. And this is huge in software, where tech decisions can make or break a project.
Okay, so paint me a picture. How does this actually play out, like a real-world software scenario?
Let's say you've got two devs, right? They're working on a feature, and bam, they disagree on the best way to code something, like an algorithm. Now, in a low-trust environment, one might just cave to avoid conflict, even if they have doubts.
Or even worse, they start, like, trash-talking each other's code behind their backs.
Exactly. That's a recipe for disaster. But high-trust environment. Those devs, they're cool with speaking their minds, debating the pros and cons of each approach. And guess what? They end up with a solution that's way better than either could have come up with alone.
So it's like two heads are better than one, but only if there's trust in the mix.
Exactly. Healthy conflict, the kind built on trust and respect.
Yeah.
That's a gold mine for innovation and problem solving.
And speaking of solving problems, the article's third step, accountability, seems key for tackling those challenges as a team, wouldn't you say?
You nailed it. And here's where the article really digs into shared ownership. It's not about playing the blame game when things go sideways. It's about everyone owning the outcome, good or bad.
It's about ditching that blame culture that can pop up in software teams, especially when deadlines are looming and the pressure's on.
Exactly. There's even a study mentioned in the article found that teams with high accountability are way more likely to deliver projects on time within budget. Plus, they're happier. Higher job satisfaction, better team morale, the works.
Makes sense. When everyone feels ownership, it stops being just a job.
Yeah.
You know, it's a shared mission.
Precisely. And that feeling, that shared responsibility, it sets the stage for the next step, which is all about putting team goals ahead of individual glory.
Oof, haven't we all been there? Stuck on a team where someone's more worried about taking credit than the project success.
Tell me about it. And the article points out how damaging that can be, especially in software where collaboration is everything. If someone's always trying to hog the spotlight, steal credit, it breeds resentment, and the team suffers.
And it's Drew Harris, the author, who emphasizes this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shifting the focus to what we achieve together, it doesn't just boost morale, it directly impacts the quality of the work.
Absolutely. When people feel valued for what they bring to the table instead of competing, that's when you get a positive, productive environment.
And that brings us to the final step, which honestly feels a bit counterintuitive, especially in tech. Vulnerability builds stronger bonds.
It's funny, isn't it? Vulnerability. We're taught it's a weakness, something to hide, especially at work. But this article, it makes a strong case for why it's crucial for trust.
You know, I've been in those spots, afraid to speak up, ask for help, because I didn't want to look clueless. Looking back, those were the times I learned the least, contributed the least.
A lot of us have been there, and the article talks about how that fear that fear of being vulnerable. It creates a culture of silence. People are terrified to admit mistakes, ask for a hand, and it just kills progress, kills innovation.
So how do you make it safe to be vulnerable?
Yeah.
Because saying be vulnerable and actually feeling comfortable doing it, those are two different things.
That's where psychological safety comes in.
Psychological safety. Okay, that's interesting. Tell me more.
The article describes it as this shared belief on a team that it's safe to take interpersonal risks. Basically, you feel like you can speak your mind, ask for help, even admit you messed up, and you won't get crucified for it.
That makes a lot of sense. With that kind of safety net, you're more likely to take risks, to innovate, to learn from your mistakes. But how do you create that environment? It seems like it takes more than just saying, hey, everyone, be vulnerable now.
You're telling me it takes real effort, consistent action from every single person, but especially from leaders.
So leaders play a huge role in making vulnerability and trust a reality.
Absolutely. And the article even gives specific ways leaders can do this, and it all starts with walking the walk themselves.
Okay, but what does that look like in practice? It's not like a leader's going to stand up in a meeting and be like, hey, I messed up today, everyone point and laugh.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not that dramatic. The article talks about leaders being open about their own struggles, like asking for help when they need it, admitting when they make mistakes, and actually taking responsibility for it.
Interesting. So it's more about being real, being approachable, not trying to be perfect all the time.
Exactly. It's about giving permission for everyone else to be human too. When a leader's willing to be vulnerable, it trickles down to the whole team.
Yeah, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
If my manager's cool with saying they don't know everything, I'm way more likely to speak up when I'm stuck.
Precisely. And that reminds me, trust. It's a journey, not a finish line. You're constantly working on it, nurturing it.
It's like that line from the article, trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. That one really stuck with me because it shows how easily you can break trust, even by accident, and how much effort it takes to rebuild it.
Powerful metaphor. And it shows how important it is to be careful with what you say, what you do, especially as part of a team.
One thing I appreciated about the article was how it connected trust back to the actual work, the output. It's easy to get lost in the idea of building trust, but this article showed how it leads to real results.
For sure. And it's not just theory. There are actual studies cited in the article that show a direct link between high-trust work environments and good stuff like way better productivity, higher quality products, even lower employee turnover. It's wild.
So it's not just about feeling warm and fuzzy, it's about tangible outcomes.
You got it. That's why it's so crucial to stop just talking about trust and start taking action to build it within your teams.
Right. Okay, so we've covered the 5 steps,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm curious, from your experience, are there any common traps teams fall into when they try to put this stuff into practice?
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing it's not always smooth sailing.
Oh, definitely not. It's rarely that straightforward. One big pitfall is mistaking being nice with actually building trust. Real trust. It means having those tough conversations, giving feedback that might be hard to hear.
Ugh. Yeah, I've been on those teams where everyone's super polite on the surface, but there's this, elephant in the room that nobody wants to address.
Exactly. And that tension just festers. The article actually talks about how healthy conflict, when it's done right with respect and a shared goal, it's actually crucial for growth.
Because if you're not challenging each other, pushing each other to be better, you're probably not reaching your full potential as a team.
You got it. And again, it comes back to psychological safety. When people feel safe to speak their minds, even if their ideas are different, it allows for so much more creativity and innovation.
It's about creating a culture of respect where everyone feels heard, even when they disagree.
Absolutely. And leaders have to be intentional about making that happen. The article even talks about having specific practices, like during meetings or even just baked into how the team works to encourage open communication and feedback.
So like what? What are some things leaders can actually do to make feedback less scary?
One idea is starting meetings with a quick check-in time, where everyone can share any concerns or roadblocks they have. It opens up the floor for communication right away and makes asking for help feel normal. Another thing is to encourage feedback from everyone, not just managers to their team.
So it's about making feedback a regular thing, where everyone feels comfortable giving and receiving it.
That's the goal. And it requires a mindset shift, moving away from seeing feedback as a personal attack and seeing it as a chance to grow.
And that's where trust comes full circle, right?
Absolutely. Without trust, any feedback, even if it's meant to be helpful, can feel like an attack. But in a high-trust environment, feedback becomes a gift, a way to learn and improve together.
It's interesting to see how all these steps we've been talking about, they're all connected.
Mm.
You can't really have one without the other.
That's a great point. And it's something this article does really well. It shows how all these things work together and gives a framework for building trust in software teams.
It's not just a to-do list. It's about changing how you think and committing to a more collaborative, respectful, and ultimately more successful way of working.
Exactly. And that brings me back to something you mentioned earlier, the impact of trust, or the lack of it, on the actual work being done. I think it's worth looking at what happens when there's not enough trust.
Absolutely. Because we've talked about the good stuff,
Mm.
but we need to talk about the downsides too. So what are some signs that a software team might be struggling with trust?
One of the most obvious ones is a lack of open and honest communication.
So if it seems like people are holding back, that's a red flag for sure.
For sure, for sure. And it can show up in like sneaky ways. You might see people hesitate to talk in meetings, especially if it means disagreeing with, someone higher up. Or maybe you notice those side conversations after a meeting where people feel safer talking in private than voicing their concerns to the whole group.
Yeah, it's like they say, people don't say what they say what they think is safe.
Exactly. And that fear, it can absolutely crush creativity. The article even mentions a study found that high trust teams twice as likely to come up with innovative solutions compared to the low trust ones, twice as likely.
Wow, okay, that's huge. So we've got lack of communication as a red flag. What else should we be watching out for?
Another big one is micromanagement. When there's no trust, managers, they feel like they have to be all over everything, checking every detail, second-guessing every decision. It totally stifles the team.
It's like there's that saying, trust but verify. But when you're verifying every single thing, it's not really trusting anymore.
Exactly. And for software developers who usually thrive on independence, on owning their work, micromanaging is a killer. It kills their motivation, and it can even tank productivity because they're spending more time reporting on what they're doing instead of actually coding.
So it's like this domino effect.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of trust doesn't just hurt morale. It impacts the quality of the work, the speed, everything.
You said it. And in the long run, it can even lead to good people leaving talented developers. They're not going to stick around in an environment where they don't feel trusted, where they don't feel empowered. They'll find somewhere that values them.
And that's a nightmare scenario for any company, especially in tech these days. It's so competitive.
You're preaching to the choir. That's why it's absolutely mission critical for companies, organizations, everyone to make building trust a top priority. And that means understanding how vital it is, what affects it, and being proactive about making it happen within teams.
Through all these different angles we've been looking at trust from, it's crystal clear this isn't just a nice to have, it's a must have for any team that actually wants to be great.
100%. And this article, it gives us a fantastic game plan for getting there. Sure, it takes work, it takes time, it's not always easy, but the payoff, totally worth it.
Couldn't agree more. So for everyone listening, for those ready to start cultivating this culture of trust on their own teams, what's the one thing, the most important thing you want them to take away from our deep dive today?
That's a good question. I think the biggest takeaway is this building trust. It never ends. It's not a finish line you cross. It's an ongoing process. It takes effort, it takes honesty, and it takes being willing to let your guard down a little. And it starts with each of us individually.
So true. You can't delegate building trust. It's everyone's job. And even small changes, small actions can add up over time.
Exactly. So here's one last thing for everyone listening to think about. Take a look at your own team. What's one small thing, one small action you could take today, right now, to help create a more trusting, more collaborative environment?
What a great question to leave everyone with. We all have the power to make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today. It's been a really eye-opening conversation.
The pleasure was all mine.
And for everyone listening, until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.